like to come up for a story this morning?
I'll be there in 1
Yes, anyone want to come up? How are you?
Good.
I haven't seen you for a long time.
Because we always been late.
Oh. Hi, Sam. Hi, Lucy. I haven't seen you.
Is Catherine here?
No, Catherine. Catherine is away because it's spring break, so she's away this week. Well, I have a story to tell you, and this story is an old story, not as old as some of the ones I tell, but it's older than all of us, and it happens in a different place than often it happens. And this story is about a little town and about two people that live in this little town. And it's the sort of place where miracles could happen. Do you know what a miracle is?
I want to.
That's okay. A miracle is something that happens that is a big surprise. So, this is a story about a man named Jacob. And a miracle was the furthest thing from Jacob's mind. Jacob was a rich man. He had a big house, which I have here. He had a big house, and he had lots of nice things, lots of nice clothes. But he was too busy figuring out how to make more money to be concerned about miracles. And he would come to what was called a synagogue. We call it a church like this, but he would go to the synagogue, which was his church, and in the synagogue, at the front, there was a big chest that was considered to be really special, and it was at the front. And when he would go to the synagogue every week, the rabbi or the minister would begin to speak, and right away, Jacob would fall asleep. He slept in church every week. Never heard a thing, never woke up until it was over. And when it would end, he would wake up and he'd go back to his nice home. Well, there was another man in this story, and his name was David. David was quite poor, and his job was to clean the church, to clean the synagogue. So you can see he has a broom, and he would come in after the service was done, and he would clean the church. And he was too busy thinking about how to feed his family to watch for miracles. And so he would clean, and then he would go home to his tiny home with all his children. He had a lot of children. Well, that's pretty much how things went every day or every week. Jacob would come, he would fall asleep, he'd go home. David would come in, he would clean, he would go home. And it went on and on until one day. And Jacob was at the synagogue, and as usual, he had fallen asleep. And he did something he's never done before. all of a sudden, he woke up. He woke up. And what he did, when he woke up, he heard the rabbi, the minister who was at the front, he heard him say these words from the Torah. He was reading from a scroll, and he heard him say these words: "You shall bake 12 loaves of bread, and set them before me in 3 rows of 4 each." That was it. Then he yawned, and he fell back asleep. So, when the service was over, Jacob woke up, but he remembered that thing about the 12 loaves of bread. And he thought that God had spoke to him in that. And he said, why would God speak to me? I was asleep. And why 12 loaves of bread? Anyway, he raced home and he baked 12 loaves of bread. And so there they were, 12 loaves of bread. And he looked at them and he thought, well, now I've got a problem. How do I get the bread to God? And he decided that the synagogue was the holiest place, so he'd take it to the synagogue. So he picked up the loaves of bread, went back to the synagogue, and he's looking around, he's thinking, where can I leave this? He says, I can't leave it by the door, because that's too busy. And there was on the wall, just like we have in the back corner, there was a wall of books, and he thought, well, that's too crowded, I can't leave it there. And then he thought, well, maybe by the wall, but no, he was afraid they'd get stepped on. And then he looked and he saw the ark. And he thought, I know, I'll put the bread in the big chest in the ark. So he opened the doors and he put the bread in and he closed the doors. Well, he felt a little foolish, but anyway, he left it there and he went home. Well, he had no sooner left than David arrived to clean, and he was sweeping and dusting and tidying, and then he stopped in front of the big chest, in front of the ark, and he was so hungry, and his family was so hungry, and he said, "Oh God, we are out of food. Oh God of compassion, I'm afraid if you don't help us soon, we're all going to starve." And then he opened the doors, and of course inside there were 12 loaves of bread. And he said, "Oh God, I didn't know you worked like that. I prayed for this bread and you gave me this bread." And he was so thankful, and he said, "Blessed are you for answering those prayers." And so he gathered up the bread and he took it home to his children. Well, no sooner had David left than Jacob came back to the synagogue because he wanted to see if anything had actually happened. And of course he got back and he opened the doors and the bread was gone. And he said, "Oh my God, you really ate the bread. I wasn't sure it was really you, so I scrimped on the eggs." "This is wonderful," he said. "God, next week I'll be back. Next week I'll be back. We're here with 12 new loaves, and this time I'll spare no expense." And he was so excited, and he raced home. So the next week, just as he promised, he baked 12 more loaves of bread, but this time he put raisins and cinnamon in the bread. Want to smell it? Does it smell good?
Yes.
Yeah, it smells good, doesn't it? So And so he did the same thing. He took them over to the synagogue, and he put them into the ark, just as he had before. And he said, "Praise you, O God, who accepts the gifts of those who offer them in love." And then he left. Well, once again, David came in to clean and to sweep, and he said, "Oh God, we have eaten all the bread you gave us last week, and some of it we gave to those who were also hungry, besides my own family, and now we have nothing left. I know I shouldn't ask, but if it's possible, could you please, in your infinite compassion and love, give me something more to eat?" And he very carefully opened the doors, and there they were, 12 more loaves of bread, this time with raisins and cinnamon. And he was so excited, and he said, "Praise you, O God, who answers the prayers of those who call upon you in need." And he scooped up the loaves and ran home and shared them with his family. Well, this went on week after week after week after week after week, with Jacob coming in, and David coming in, and Jacob coming back. And it was soon months, and then years. Years this happened, with this bread being made and eaten every week. And then one day, the rabbi, the minister, happened to be there when he saw this whole thing happen. He saw Jacob come in, put the bread in the ark and leave. He saw David come in, take the bread home. And what he did was he called the two of them to come and meet him at the synagogue. And so Jacob and David, oops, one of the children fell over. Too much to eat, I guess. He called them together, and the rabbi told them what had been going on. That one of them had been bringing bread, and the other one had been taking the bread home. And Jacob said he was very sad. And he said, "I should have known that God doesn't eat bread. And there wasn't any miracle after all." And David was also very sad and put his head down and said, "I should have known that God doesn't bake bread either. There wasn't any miracle after all." And the rabbi said to them, "You're both right. God doesn't bake bread. God doesn't eat bread. But that's because miracles aren't like that." And then what he did, he took both of their hands, and he joined their hands together. And he said to them, "Now that you know, Jacob, you have to go on baking bread. And David, you have to go on taking the bread back to your family." And the rabbi said to them, "Now you know that God's hands are your hands, and God's heart are your hearts." So, Jacob and David looked at each other, and they knew that was true. And so now they come to the synagogue together, and they sit together, and they still share bread. And you know what? Jacob never falls asleep. He never falls asleep. And the two of them understand that their hands are God's hands, and their hearts are the heart of God. I wonder what part of the story you liked best.
The bad bread smell.
How good the bread smelled. Yeah.
I think that's what they choose. They
Yes,
say too.
it smells pretty good. Mm. Good enough to eat if it wasn't glued to the tray. Well, that's our story for today. All about how we can do miracles, every one of us. We're going to sing a song now, and then you can head off if you like to Children's Church. Rhonda's going to have something for you to do there. So we're going to sing I Am the Dream. You are the dream.
Hello.